you've never lived through anything like this. But I saw it in the 1970s, and that's when the word stagflation was invented. But it was a combination of stagnation or low growth or recession and inflation. Now, going back to the 1960s, the theory was, well, you can have high inflation with high growth, or you can have low inflation with low growth. But nobody thought that you could have high inflation and low growth. That's what we got. And that's what stagflation is. And we could be headed in that direction. The inflation is already here. So that's people have debated that for a year, but that debate's over. The inflation's here. The question is, how are we on growth? The answer is not very good. The Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta has a GDP forecasting tool, which is quite good. None of them are perfect, but it's the best one I've seen. As of now, they're projecting first quarter U.S. growth at 1.3%. And of course, the first quarter is over. It's over at March 31st. We'll get the number next week. But their forecast, which is pretty accurate, is 1.3%. That's almost a rounding error away from a recession. So it's weak to begin with. And that was mostly before the war in Ukraine, because the war didn't start till the end of February. The sanctions didn't come on until March. So 2/3 of the first quarter had nothing to do with the war. But now, of course, not only are we in the war, but the sanctions are starting to have a much bigger impact. So I would expect second quarter growth to be even weaker, maybe even negative in the United States. And yet I don't see any end to the inflation for the reason we just mentioned, which is the Fed can't raise interest rates enough. So we may, in fact, get this, what we call stagflation, which is weak growth and high inflation at the same time. And of course, the weak growth will be very bad for stocks. Right. Well, tech stocks have had a great run. We all know about it. And they were big beneficiaries of the pandemic because, at least in the United States, and I believe it was true in South Korea as well, people couldn't go out. I mean, the restaurants were closed, stores were closed. You could stay home and watch, Netflix or some streaming. You could watch movies at home and you could order online, maybe, but you really couldn't go out at all. And the economy was very much shut down. So we know a lot of businesses that suffered because of that, but who won? Well, the answer is Microsoft, Netflix, Amazon, Google, which they call Alphabet, Facebook, which now is called Meta. They keep changing their names, but those were the stocks that did the best. Well, they no longer have that driver. As I said, with the exception of China, the pandemic's pretty much over. People are going out, they're going to retail, they're going to restaurants, etc. So they don't have that, impetus, if you will. And at the same time, they were very dependent on low interest rates. We had something in the United States in English called TINA, TINA, and that stands for there is no alternative. And that's TINA. And what it meant was that you had to buy the tech stocks because U.S. Treasury bonds were offering nothing. Bank deposits offered nothing. There were no good alternatives. Well, that's not true anymore. The 10-year Treasury note, which is a very safe investment, is yielding almost 3%. That's as much as the dividends on most stocks for stocks that even pay dividends. So there is an alternative. So the combination of higher interest rates, the end of the pandemic, could lead to a very significant tailing off in tech stocks. Now, are there sectors that look interesting? Yes, I would say energy stocks, ExxonMobil, Shell, BP, Total, Chevron, and others. They've been beaten down because of all this, climate alarmism. There's not very good science behind. I mean, climate does change. I used to live on a beautiful body of water 10,000 years ago. It was a glacier. So it changed, but it took 10,000 years. But all this stuff about, the world's coming to an end in 10 years, it's all nonsense. We can't get away from oil and natural gas. We can't. Even you can bring in alternatives. I own the largest solar field in New England, non-commercial in New England, my part of the country. So I have a solar field. I know a lot about how they work, but you can't. It's intermittent. I know one thing: it doesn't work at night, and it's not working today because we're having a snowstorm. So the point is, it's what's called intermittent power. Wind is intermittent, solar is intermittent. You cannot run a modern power grid because you need a base of power. You need a baseline of power at all times. just to keep the grid functioning, and those things can't supply it. Plus, when you look at developing economies, the demand for energy is rising faster than the alternatives can scale. So sure, there's a role for wind and solar, that's fine, but demand is going up even more. So how do you fill the gap? The answer is oil, natural gas, and uranium if you want to build nuclear power plants.
Before we continue, help us clicking that YouTube like button and subscribe now to our channel. This shows the algorithm that you valued this information. And it helps us spread that message. Sharing is caring. And now, let's continue.
I have bad news for you. If you're not rich by now, you're screwed. And if you're in debt, you're even double screwed. How so, you might wonder? Well, the sad truth is that you're working your whole life to make someone else rich. The mega corporations, the banks, the politicians, everyone is getting richer. They get your money. And what is even worse, they get your time, they get your life. You are not even in a rat race, you're in a financial prison. But what could a solution for you look like? Honestly, I don't know, but I know what a solution for me would look like. It's very simple. I use whatever money I have and I multiply it with 1,000. This could make my life much easier and probably yours as well. If you have $1,000 available and multiply this with 1,000, I believe that this could solve some financial issue for the one or the other. Of course, if you're ugly, you would have to multiply it with much more than 1,000. My name is Marco Stan, and this is what I decided to do. I decided to 1000x my money. This is not a joke. I know what you may be thinking. What is this guy talking about? How should this work? This is not possible. Well, I made a detailed video where I laid out my plan. And some clever folks might even want to look at this plan and copy it and do exactly what I do. This is just a little hint on the side. You have two options. You leave, you forget what you have seen. You do whatever you're doing and you hope that somehow you get some other results. Good luck with that. Or you click the link below the video. You enter your email address because I'm not showing this to everybody. You at least watch my video on how I plan to 1000x my money. The choice is yours. Make the right choice. Join me. See what a different future you could have. See at least how I intend, how I plan to do the 1000x. So click on the link below, enter your email address, and I see you on the other side. Your Marco Stan.